This podcast episode is brought to you by Coors Light. These days, everything is go, go, go. It's nonstop hustle all the time. Work, friends, family, expect you to be on 24/7. Well, sometimes you just need to reach for a Coors Light because it's made to chill. Coors Light is cold lagered, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's as crisp and refreshing as the Colorado Rockies. It is literally made to chill. Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that's made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door with Drizzly or Instacart. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
On this week's episode of The Timeline, Editor-in-Chief of Hoops Habit and Phoenix Suns reporter Gerald Bourguet, and NBA writer for NBAMath.com Nate Wolff. Welcome to the Timeline of Phoenix Suns podcast. Basketball is almost back, and I'm so excited. My name is Mike Vigil. Sam Cooper, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. It's almost back. It's almost back. We still only have media day and training camp to talk about for now. But guys, it's almost back. Preseason basketball is a few days away, and that's really exciting.
We have a really special episode this week. We have Gerald Bourguet from Hoops Habit coming on. He's going to talk about Media Day, as we all saw lots of great stuff coming out of Media Day. We also have Nate Wolff from NBAMath.com, who wrote a really excellent article about Devin Booker. We're going to talk about that at the end of the podcast as well. So two great guests coming up, but Sam and I just wanted to talk about a little bit of things that have been coming out about the team this last week before we get to that. And the main thing is a whole bunch of nothing, really, because the Phoenix Suns were involved with the largest NBA storyline right now, which is Jimmy Butler. We talked about Jimmy Butler on our last podcast, focused on whether or not the Suns should try and make an offer to Jimmy Butler. It's pretty conclusive that we are not going to do that, but the team did get brought up in a lot of other aspects. People were wondering, were the Suns going to get involved as a third team to try and facilitate a trade and get a starting point guard out of that, with the two names being thrown out? Well, three names, I guess we could say. Jeff Teague, Goran Dragic, and Tyus Jones. So three point guards currently on other teams that are involved in trade talks. Two of them, of course, Jeff Teague and Tyus Jones on the Timberwolves, and then Goran Dragic on the Heat, potential landing spot for Jimmy Butler. So there's a lot to talk about with those players that are involved there. My main thing that I took away, I was hoping for Goran Dragic. I don't know, Sam, what did you feel about all these rumors coming out?
Well, here's the way I feel about those three players is I hate to be nitpicky because we need a point guard. And if we don't get a point guard, then we may be losing a lot of games. But on the other hand, I think you can point to pretty interesting logical arguments as to why the Suns would not really be as interested in any of those three players as some people have suggested. First of all, Goran Dragic and Jeff Teague are good players, and I like Goran, and I would be an advocate for a return. However, both of them have player options for the 2019-2020 season worth $19 million. And if you buy into this idea that the entire point of signing Trevor Ariza to a one-year deal and sort of getting Ryan Anderson to walk back the guarantee on his contract so that he could potentially be waived and stretched and the Suns could do all of this stuff to create a max contract slot for free agency next year, then I think it's unlikely that they would really be willing to take on a guy who's going to make $19 million a couple years from now, especially a guy like Goran Dragic, who's already on the wrong side of 30, or a guy like Jeff Teague, who has been mostly unimpressive his past couple of years, although he is a solid playmaker. And regarding Tyus Jones, it's sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's an interesting young player, but he doesn't really move the needle that much. And frankly, when comparing him to what we have in Shaq Harrison and Elie Okobo and Isaiah Canaan and DeAnthony Melton as well, I just don't see how that acquisition would really make any sort of difference. It might come at a lower cost, but if the Suns are still thinking about acquiring a point guard before the season starts, I think we sort of have a mid-tier of players that they've been linked to in the past, like Patrick Beverley and Milos Teodosic, Spencer Dinwiddie, Corey Joseph, guys who are really going to come at a cheaper cost and are on shorter-term deals than a Goran Dragic or a Jeff Teague, but have a little bit more experience than a guy as young as Tyus Jones.
Now, I agree basically with everything that you said, but there's one thing that I've been thinking about when it comes to this whole conversation that just keeps sticking with me, and that's anytime any player is brought up who maybe isn't the exact same age as the core, the timeline, if you will, and we look at them, a lot of Suns fans' initial reactions are, no, let's not do it. Their contract is too big. Their contract is too big. They're paid too much. It's just something that's not going to work. But I'm starting to get to the point where I'm just thinking, well, what are we going to get then? If every single player we look at who's paid a reasonable amount of money, $19 million, a lot of money. Of course, it's a lot of money. It's $19 million, but it's actually not a lot of money compared to what a player can make in today's NBA. It's about half of what a max contract is nowadays. So it's not this massive, massive contract to take on. But what my point I'm trying to get at is, if we're looking at getting a starting point guard, that's what they're paid. That's about what a starting point guard makes. So if we're talking about getting a starting point guard, if we're serious about getting a starting point guard, we have to come to terms with the fact that they're going to make about $20 million. That's what a starter makes nowadays. And a point guard, one of the most important positions on the floor, makes maybe even more than that in a lot of scenarios. So I guess the point is, for a lot of Suns fans who are listening to this, get ready. Get ready for that, because that's likely what's going to happen. And if it doesn't come this year in some sort of trade, it's probably going to come next year in free agency, and that's the going rate. They're going to make a lot of money. We can't just turn down every player that makes $19 to $20 million just because we think that that's too much. Yes, it's a lot compared to all the players we have on our roster, but we have one of those rare rosters that's filled with young guys who are underpaid. Devin Booker's making just over $3 million next season. DeAndre Ayton, $8 million. These guys could easily outperform that, but that's only because they're on rookie contracts. That's not what they're actually maybe deserving, especially Devin Booker, of getting, and we know what he's going to go up to in the coming years after his extension kicks in. I just think we can't shut down the idea of a point guard who's a starting point guard just because they get paid as much as a starting point guard gets paid. So Suns fans, get ready for that. That's going to come at some point. What do you think about that?
You're right. That's perfectly reasonable, and I understand a lot of your frustration. I felt it at various points as well. If the Suns go after a point guard in free agency, we're talking about a guy like Kemba Walker or Ricky Rubio. Ricky Rubio, for instance, probably another one of these not so amazing starting caliber point guards that is going to command something like $20 million on the open market. So I agree with you that it's coming. I guess to play devil's advocate and argue from the side of the fans that are really, really into this concept of the timeline, if you take on the money associated with a guy like Goran Dragic, who is, again, past 30, I don't remember his exact age, but I think maybe 31 at this point.
I think he's 31.
Yeah, 31. What's your ceiling with Goran Dragic or Jeff Teague as your starting point guard? Can you make the argument that, is the ceiling of a team that's built around that type of player as its playmaker, especially when you're throwing that much money at those types of players, is it a first-round exit? Is it a second-round exit? Can you build ultimately the championship contender that gets past the Houstons and the Golden States of the NBA? If you take on those sorts of deals, sort of just accepting that we're willing to overpay, we know it's an overpay, but we have to do it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think when we look at these guys, we kind of look at what can we get in these upcoming seasons. But I think the point that I've been making ever since our free agency episode, which I think was our third episode, was the value of cap space and how the value of your cap space changes based on where your team is. The Suns had a ton of cap space this last year, and they ended up using it, $15 million of it, on 1 year of a 34-year-old veteran. And it's because the value of that cap space was not very high because the Suns were not a winning team. So as we look forward on the team, that potential value of that cap space goes up if the team performs well over the next few years. And that means if you look at that cap space and you say, okay, should we be preserving cap space for the end of this season? Well, that depends. How good do you think we are going to be? How valuable will that cap space be based on how good of a destination the team becomes? Because maybe we're not going to be that good. I don't know how good we're going to be this coming year. That cap space might be more valuable in the 2021 offseason. It might be more valuable down the road in the future. And I think maybe we're rushing things a little too much, and I understand why. But we do have Devin Booker locked down. We do have DeAndre Ayton for years. We do have Josh Jackson for years. Maybe we don't push it too much, or maybe we allow the team to become sort of a more valuable destination for free agents by adding a few veterans that can show how good our young guys can be when surrounded by actual talent, and then that cap space becomes more valuable down the road in the future. It's just a balancing act that we have to put on here, and I'm not exactly sure what the best solution is, but I think you can't do both things. You can't complain that we don't have a starting point guard and then complain that the only starting point guards available are paid as much as a starting point guard. Choose one or the other. Either you're okay paying a starting point guard money, or you're okay running with the 4 guys we have. You can't ride both sides of that coin for me.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. And look, if there were an easy solution, someone would have figured it out by now. But, there's a reason we're not NBA general managers ourselves. And I guess my only worry in talking about the cap space argument is you want the Suns to utilize their cap space to their best possible ability, and you want them to start to get better because we've been getting frustrated with these tanking, losing seasons. On the other hand, you don't want to become a team like Portland, a team that locked down 2 really young, talented players in Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum long-term. Okay, that's great. That gets them into the high 40s, low 50s in terms of wins and a first-round exit. But then the talent they surround them, throwing $18 million at Evan Turner, throwing $11 million at this role player, Mo Harkless, $11 million at that role player, Myers Leonard. And right. Suddenly you've got a core of decent players, but just not enough to get you over the hump. So the Suns do have to be careful at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. It's a difficult situation for any general manager, and especially difficult for a general manager that has got a pretty short leash right now in Ryan McDonough, a guy who, well, we don't really know. But the expectation is Ryan McDonough is sort of fighting for his job with every move he makes. We don't know how true that is. It's possible he has a great relationship with Robert Sarver, but that is sort of how everyone feels. So we'll see what happens. It seems like, I think the moral of this, I don't think we got to the end of the story. The moral of it is reporters have now reported that the Suns are out of it. They're now out of these conversations, and it seems like this Jimmy Butler deal might take a little longer than we expected to get done. Of course, now that I've said that, he'll be traded tomorrow morning right after this episode is released.
Yep, always happens every time.
The other news is training camp is happening right now up in Flagstaff. There's a lot of things to talk about. Let's save that conversation. Sam and I are hoping to get someone on the podcast for our next episode that is actually at training camp. So hopefully we have somebody on there soon. And then we can actually have a conversation about what actually happened there with someone who looked them in the eyes and actually talked to the players in person. A couple things I want to talk about before we get to our interview, though. I will be out of town for an entire week, so we're going to take about a week off from episodes. So no episode next week unless something goes down. I will be prepared if there's some sort of trade and we have to set up an emergency podcast for Sam and I. So don't be afraid if a new episode doesn't come next week. We'll still be posting on Twitter. We'll still be posting on Reddit, so you'll be able to talk to us online and get some updates on what's going on with us. But just a short break for episodes, and then hopefully we'll have somebody on from training camp there. So stay tuned. But let's take a quick break, and when we come back, Gerald Bourguet from Hoops Habit, an excellent Phoenix Suns writer who was at Media Day, talking to us about what the players said, what the coach said, and what the general manager said. All right, we welcome onto the timeline editor-in-chief of Hoops Habit and Phoenix Suns lead reporter Gerald Bourguet. Gerald, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Really good. Very excited to have you on the podcast. Gerald was at Phoenix Suns Media Day along with every other reporter covering the Phoenix Suns and some of them that also cover the Denver Nuggets, I guess. It's really good to have you on here. How was Media Day? Let's just start there. How was it just from a general perspective?
It was very optimistic, and it was very beating around the bush in regards to the one gaping hole that's on the Suns roster. Everybody is very high on how Devin Booker is going to be this year, on a lot of the wings and their versatility, and the veterans that like Trevor and Ryan Anderson, what they'll bring to the table. But it's very clear that this team is going to have to try to make ends meet at point guard until some other solution presents itself.
Yeah, the first person that spoke, it looked like, I was following along on Twitter. By the way, thank you for that. Your tweets were fantastic. I felt like I was there.
Sure.
The first person that spoke, it seemed like, was Ryan McDonough. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And Ryan, of course, was immediately asked about the point guard position. Now, I feel like we've been talking about the point guard position on this podcast since it started in June, but what kind of things did he have to say, and what was your impression of how we talked about it? Of course, they're going to spin it in saying, oh, this is good, this is a competition, but how did you feel about the way he answered the questions about the point guard position?
Right. I mean, he was very upfront. He said, for now, it's going to be an open competition between those 4 players, the 2 second-round rookies, and then Isaiah Cannon and Shaq Harrison. But he was very upfront about they're going to continue to pursue deals through the preseason and leading up to the trade deadline if need be to find an upgrade at that position. And based on all the reports we've heard outside of Media Day, I mean, it makes sense. Apparently they, put out feelers on Kemba Walker, Terry Rozier, Patrick Beverly. Now we're hearing about like Tyus Jones and Jeff Teague, all of these names. So they're definitely looking into deals. I think for now, what they're going to do is just see who stands out at training camp and try to rely more on their secondary players and Kokoskov's offense to try to make up for the fact that they don't have like a true established point guard.
Yeah, I think there was 2 guys that talked about the point guard position that I saw. There was first Ryan McDonough, and Ryan McDonough seemed to say that they're sort of looking on the market still. I thought what was interesting is he singled out Elie Okobo. I think I saw that on your Twitter feed, actually. Do you remember exactly what he said about Elie Okobo in that conversation?
About McDonough?
Yeah, McDonough. I think he said something about Okobo's been standing out in workouts or something like that.
He did say that Okobo has been a standout in workouts so far, and I think he would have to have the edge going into the draft or going into the training camp just because, I mean, in the draft, they could have taken DeAnthony Melton at number 31 and instead went with Okobo. He's been there all summer, so they're a little more comfortable with what he can and can't do, so they've been watching him. Melton just came a few weeks ago, obviously. Cannon's got that veteran experience of about 5 years. But he's still coming back from, that gruesome injury was only in February. So the fact that he's even back right now is pretty incredible. But I don't know if he's had enough time back on the court to really seal that starting job. And then there's Shaq Harrison, who's kind of the dark horse in there. He talked a little bit about how he's reformed his jump shot over the summer. I think he worked with Drew Hanlon, or that might have been Melton. But he's worked on his jump shot over the summer, and it looks a lot smoother. So if that translates, he could be in the running. But I think right now the edge would probably have to be Okobo, just based on what McDonough said, the limited bit about him being a standout over the summer.
Gerald, if we talk about the other option when it comes to point guard, which is obviously making a trade for all of those names that you just listed, it seems like the logical candidate, if the Suns are going to trade for one of the better options, would be TJ Warren in terms of who they would send out just because of his contract status. In your article that you posted the other day talking about players facing the most pressure, you referred to Warren as uncharacteristically exuberant at Media Day. I was hoping you could just maybe expand a little bit on what that looked like in person and also just give us any insight into if it feels like, or just explain how there's more pressure on TJ right now.
Right. So I think TJ Warren is very cognizant of the view that everyone has of him in Phoenix and outside Phoenix right now. If you remember on exit interviews at the end of last year, he kind of got hammered because he was just so taken aback by the concept of being a sixth man. He didn't answer the question well. He was confused as to why people were asking about, Josh Jackson starting over him and whether he'd embrace a six-man role. He really just didn't come off well from that exchange. I feel like that and the work that he's put in on his three-point shot over the summer, I think he kind of gets it now. He understands that he needs to have that three-point shot to have a place on this team, that he needs to be able to spread the floor to keep a starting job or to play significant minutes with all these wings that this team has. But he just came up to our scrum and we were expecting, normally you have to kind of go to him, surround him, kind of corner him. And the answers he gives you, he's not a very articulate guy. He'll give you 5 to 6 word answers and that's very talkative for TJ Warren, but he was like genuinely excited to see us and like talk to us. He asked everybody in the circle how they were doing. And he gave like fully, well, I mean, as in-depth as TJ Warren's going to get, but in-depth answers on what he did as far as his shots concerned, how his form is a little bit different, how many shots he was taking over the summer to kind of fine-tune that shot. So he was like as excited as I've ever seen TJ Warren. And it was kind of nice because, obviously he's a key player on the team, so it's good from an interview standpoint. And it's also good just because, after a while you start to question, like, is he happy here? And he mentioned a couple times, I'm definitely happy to be back. So I think he's fully aware of the situation. There's definitely pressure on him because he makes the most sense as a trade candidate if the Suns are looking for a point guard. But, they still haven't worked one out. So if this heads into the season, he's going to have his chance to prove that he's a different player and that he's worth keeping around.
Well, you also noted TJ put up 300 to 400 three-pointers a day. And you also said he corrected that habit of turning his body and kicking his feet out when he landed. Like, he lands awkwardly when he shoots with his form. So that's something that we've noticed over the past few years as well. Now, do you actually believe that work over the summer will lead to tangible results? Because it seems like at Media Day every year, you can always point to a certain number of guys and it's going to be like, yeah, these guys got better. They improved their form. They added X number of pounds of muscle, all these things that are said.
Right. I mean, it's tough to say just based on the evidence that we've had so far. I mean, it's hard to see him shooting above like 34, 35% optimistically. But at the same time, I mean, if you're putting up 300 to 400 shots a day, he said he was shooting until his arms felt like they were going to fall off every day. There were a couple of videos that surfaced over the summer of him during workouts. And I mean, obviously they're playing against, not NBA competition, but his shot did look better in those videos. And, I think he's got a real chance at improving that shot. McDonough mentioned without being questioned about it that his shot looked better. Same thing with Kokoskov. And a couple of players actually also mentioned when we asked about TJ Warren and his shot that it looked better and that he was hitting at a more consistent rate. So if that is the case, I mean, more power to him. I would still pencil it in around like 34, 35. But, it's one of those tough things for Media Day because you always hear about guys that practice their 3-point, like Andre Drummond is apparently a 3-point shooter now. I don't know how much but I'm cautiously optimistic that he said that this was the only thing he focused on over the summer. So, most guys are normally like, oh, I worked on everything. I worked on a little bit of this, a little bit of that. TJ was like, no, I just worked on this every day. So we'll see.
So I guess we still can't expect him to pass the ball much.
No, probably not.
Improved shooting was a theme of Media Day, I would say. And it's a fair theme because we can talk about individually. Josh Jackson talked about improving his three-point shot. Shaq Harrison talked about improving his three-point shot. And, of course, TJ Warren, as we just talked about improving his three-point shot. But beyond that, Ryan McDonough talked about, as a team, he talked about 3 boxes that they were trying to check off. Of course, he conveniently left off point guard. But he said shooting, defense, and vets. And I think it's fair to say that shooting has improved. I think I saw a quote from McDonough that said this is the best shooting team that the Suns have had in his whole tenure as a general manager of the team. Now, I tend to agree with that. Now, you talked to Igor Kokoskov. You were able to talk to the coach or see him address the media as a whole. What was your impression of how he's going to use this sort of breadth of shooting that the team finally has?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of players mentioned this as well, but they said that with this offense under Igor, the spacing is just noticeably different as far as, I mean, it's very set on multiple actions, reading the defense, side-to-side ball movement. So there's a lot of ball movement and off-ball player movement going on in this offense. So having that three-point shooting is going to be huge. We saw some of it in Summer League, but with more shooters like Trevor Rees out there, Mikal Bridges, Devin Booker, obviously, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he's able to utilize so many different players on both ends of the floor because, if you look at the Suns' wings, they've got some guys that can shoot threes, but don't play defense. And then they've got some guys that play defense but can't shoot threes. And the only guys that kind of fit both categories are Ariza and Bridges right now. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how he utilizes that, especially when the Suns go small, to try and make up for that lack of a point guard situation. But the players were pretty excited about what they've learned of the new offense so far and how it puts everybody in positions to, touch the ball, move off the ball, get open looks, get good looks in their favorite spots. So it seems very tailored to his team's skill sets rather than, some coaches come in and just put in their system. It seems more like it's going to put these specific guys in positions to succeed.
I think if you look at Igor's history, he has a clear history of being able to do that. I mean, it's incredibly impressive that he worked as an assistant coach for Detroit from 2003 to 2008, that he worked with the Detroit championship team, this grinded down team that would routinely hold their opponents into the 60s or 70s in points. He then immediately went on to serve as an assistant coach with Phoenix for 5 years and was a part of our 2010 Western Conference Finals run that was basically the polar opposite of that style. And if you just look at his career, he's been a guy who's consistently been able to adapt from system to system. And if you look at what Ryan McDonough and James Jones have both said about the reasons they had in hiring him in the first place, it sounds like that was one of the main reasons, was that he's willing to take suggestions and has sort of a versatile way of going about doing things where he's not going to pigeonhole guys into certain roles just because that's his preferred way.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, I just went to the State of the Suns event, and I was able to see Ryan McDonough and Igor Kokoshkov speak in person as well. And my impression of Igor was that he was a little bit quiet, a little bit soft-spoken, but very smart and very focused. Now, I think a lot of Suns fans don't really know what to expect from Igor, just sort of from a personality standpoint, but even from a basketball standpoint. What was your impression, Gerald, when you spoke to Igor? What was he like in person?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much identical. He doesn't talk very loud. He's very soft-spoken, but he clearly knows what he's talking about, and I feel like he relates to the players, not in the typical way that you hear about young guys who were just playing in the league, that they relate to the players. Like, he relates to the players in a way where there's still that separation between coach and player, where they respect his opinion, where he's an authority figure, and he just knows the game of basketball really well. So I think the results are going to speak for themselves once this team starts competing a little more, once the offense is flowing and guys are getting in their spots. He's not the most animated or, exuberant guy, but I think the results are going to speak for themselves, and the Suns are going to appreciate his basketball intellect more than anything else.
Now, we're talking about Ryan McDonough's, the boxes that he said that they checked off, or that they were trying to check off. Shooting we talked about, but another theme of Media Day, and then seemingly staying a theme into training camp, would be defense. It seems like the team is sort of preaching a defense-first focus from the top and also from the players. Now, you saw Igor talk about that a little bit. And Ryan, what was your impression of that? Do you buy into that, I guess? It's all Media Day, but...
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think most of the focus when it came to the defensive end either bottled down to Trevor Ariza being a good influence or ingraining it in DeAndre Ayton now, that if he gets this defense thing down, like, the offense is going to come for him. He's a natural on that end of the floor. He's got the frame, the body, the touch, like, all of that is going to fall into place for him. But if he focuses on defense now, he has a chance to be truly special, be a two-way player, be a potential anchor. I don't know if that's going to actually lead to better results. But, with a guy his size and his speed and athleticism, like, he has all the tangible skills you need to be a good defender. So I think it's just going to bottle down to somebody preaching that side of the floor to him in a way that, we didn't see at U of A. And I think the Suns have a good chance of coaxing that out of him. I don't know if the Suns are going to be a much better team because, their starting point guard is one of those four guys. They've got Ryan Anderson out there. They've got a rookie at center, and then there's Devin Booker. Like, when 3 to 4 of your starting lineup is bad defensively, it's probably not going to go well. But they do have more defenders on the roster. They have Josh Jackson, they have Bridges. So there's going to be an adjustment process, but hopefully there's a slight step up from being the league's worst defense. You can't really go too much further downhill than that.
Now, in your personal opinion, Gerald, what do you think DeAndre Ayton's rookie season actually looks like? Because, well, first of all, how do you think he's going to be utilized in the offense? And also, to what extent, as much as Igor is preaching defense right now, do you think he can step in and sort of anchor that defense for the Suns when that has been one of the main concerns that scouts have had about him as a prospect over the last year?
Yeah, I mean, at Media Day, there was a lot of talk about how maybe this year guys are going to target Ayton on the defensive end. They're going to put him in pick and rolls on the perimeter. They're going to give it to big guys down low, try to get him in foul trouble. But if he's able to take his lumps, I think he stands a decent chance of, showing people that he can improve on that end of the floor, that he's not, the guy that we saw in college. That's not going to be his NBA destiny, I guess. On the offensive end, they kind of chalked it up to, we know he's going to get touches down low. He's going to get putbacks. He's going to get, easy looks at the rim on lobs and pick and roll situations. So I'm not sure if we're going to see, too many flashes of Ayton's stretch 5 potential, but at the very least, he's going to bang bodies down low. He's going to get points around the basket a lot like he did at Arizona. He doesn't have the same physical advantage, size advantage that he had in college, obviously, but that guy's still a load in the paint. He's still super athletic. There were a couple of videos of him at training camp throwing down dunks where he was looking down at the rim. So I think for year one, it's going to be pretty straightforward for him on both ends. But hopefully there are glimpses of what he's going to be able to become, as a potential stretch 5, as a guy who can score from anywhere on the floor, and, a communicative leader of the defense, because they are emphasizing him being vocal and talking to everybody on the floor.
One of the fun things about Media Day is you start to get to know the personalities that are new to the team. Now, DeAndre Ayton is the biggest new addition to the team. Now, as I talked about a second ago, I went to the State of the Suns event. DeAndre Ayton was also there. And I think a lot of people, when they think of DeAndre Ayton, they think of this big, huge personality, sort of how he comes across on social media. But when I saw him in person, and when he was speaking up in front of everybody, he actually seemed a little bit shy, a little bit reserved, maybe even a little nervous. I mean, all of this is new to him. He's a massive star. There was a great quote that you tweeted about him saying, "Do I have to do this next year?" as he was walking up on stage to take questions, which was hilarious. But from my experience, there's two DeAndre Aytons. There's the DeAndre Ayton when he's having fun with his friends on social media, where he sort of is that big personality, the guy sort of dancing or doing the DJ event at the NBA Rookie Day, when he's sort of around people he's really comfortable with. And then there's this sort of shy DeAndre Ayton where he maybe isn't fully prepared to be the face of a franchise as far as everything that comes with that personality-wise. Do you agree with that assessment, or was that the impression that you got from him?
Absolutely. I mean, he did crack a couple of jokes, but you could tell that he's, I don't want to say afraid, but he doesn't want to be lumped in with, those goofy kind of Dwight Howard, Shaquille O'Neal personalities from back in the day. Like, he is his own person. He's got a couple of different personalities. And like you said, he does have the fun-loving side of him. And I think that'll come out once he proves himself in the league, once he's an established star and people, accept his on-court game to the point where they can embrace who he is as a person. But I think for now, he's coming into the league with the mindset of, I haven't done anything yet. I haven't proven anything yet. If I'm, my goofy self, people are just going to think that I'm not dedicated, or they're going to think that I'm not serious about this. He mentioned a couple of times at the podium what he's learned over the summer as far as how serious these guys take this game. Like, this is their job. This is their livelihood. It's more than just a game. And I think that was something of an eye-opener for him. He's still his fun self deep down, and I'm sure that's going to come to the surface quite a few times throughout his rookie year and for the rest of his career. But for now, I think he's very focused on buying into what Igor is telling him about, you buy in defensively, you sacrifice a little bit now, and you're going to be great down the road. So I think he's coming into it with the right mindset. And hopefully that fun-loving side of him comes out once he starts to establish himself on the court.
Someone I've definitely also seen a fun-loving side from as we're talking about new acquisitions. There was a really funny video yesterday on Instagram of Ryan Anderson and Trevor Ariza talking with, I think it was Tom Leander, but I don't quite remember, about how they would hype up the team in the pregame huddle. And Ryan Anderson gives this impassioned speech from the movie Troy, which is totally non-basketball related, obviously, just joking around. But Gerald, did you get any sort of first impression of Ariza and Anderson at Media Day and, what their personalities are like and what they can contribute to this team both on and off the court?
Right. I mean, Ariza was pretty straightforward. He laughed about a couple of things. Like someone asked him about, will he miss being in State Farm commercials with Chris Paul? And he was like, that was one commercial. It's like, that was the only commercial I've ever been in. But other than that, he was pretty straightforward. I think he's pretty excited about this new challenge. I mean, if you look at it, he's going from the team with the best record in basketball to the worst. So a lot of guys would kind of just be like, yeah, I'm here for my paycheck. And then after a year, I'm out of here. But it seems like he's genuinely excited to kind of take on this new challenge in his career, mentoring all these young wings who can learn from him on both ends of the floor, as far as being a defender goes, as far as being a consistent three-point shooter goes. Devin Booker was talking about one thing that stood out to him in workouts was, they were playing some scrimmages and Ariza didn't score a single point in a game and his team still won. And Ariza kind of used that as a teaching moment. Like, you don't have to score to help your team win. There are other things that you can do. So I think he's going to be really good for this team. Anderson is more of a personality than I realized. He was very lively, very talkative, looked people directly in the eye when they asked him questions, came up to the mic, was asking everybody how they're doing. Like, he's a very animated personality, which I did not realize. And I think he's really glad to be here because him and Trevor are better friends than people realize. They're very good friends. They're very close. And it helps to have another veteran like that in the locker room. He was saying, it's good that Trevor is here first because now I can kind of be more empowered to give my advice, give my thoughts on certain things because I'm comfortable around my friend who's also in the locker room. Like he said he probably wouldn't do that normally if it was just him in there. But since he's comfortable around Ariza, he can kind of help teach these youngsters as well. And Tyson Chandler mentioned it, like he was tired of being the only veteran. Him and someone else said that, if there's only one voice in the locker room saying the same thing over and over, it's easy to tune it out. So now that they've got multiple voices in the room, multiple veterans to learn from, when they're being told there's a light at the end of the tunnel, hang in there, keep working, it won't just fall on deaf ears this time.
Well, first off, what was Jared Dudley saying? That's what I'm wondering now because that's what he was here for. But what you talked a little bit about Devin Booker telling the story about Trevor Ariza, his team winning without Trevor Ariza scoring at all. Did any of the other Suns younger guys talk about the veterans, whether it be Anderson, Ariza, or Chandler, and say anything that stuck out to you?
Not really any specific stories that stuck out quite like that one. Dragon Bender had mentioned he's already learned a lot from Ariza in their time over the summer.
That's interesting.
Yeah, which I think could be good news. In training camp, somebody tweeted something about how his release is a lot quicker and it's getting more arc underneath it now. So hopefully that's a lasting development, and you could definitely attribute that to learning something from Ryan Anderson. But, and Mikal Bridges, I think on draft night, he had said that he wanted to emulate Trevor Ariza's career, which when they told him that at the media day and asked him about it, Trevor Ariza was kind of surprised. He hadn't heard that yet. So he was kind of humbled. And I think there's a good interaction between Ariza, Anderson, and the younger guys that they're going to be kind of in charge of mentoring already, which, is the status quo for what you hear from media day. But They seem like genuinely good guys. They seem like they want to help these youngsters compete. And both of them are projected to be starting right now. So they won't be unhappy with their role, at least for the first half of the season.
One thing that Igor Kokoshkov talked about that stuck with me was he made a point of talking about playmakers versus point guards, and it seemed like he was sort of referencing that maybe there doesn't need to be a traditional point guard on the floor at all times. Now, am I reading too much into that, or was that the impression you got? Basically, is there a chance that we see Josh Jackson play point guard or Devin Booker play point guard in serious minutes in this coming season based on the way Igor talked about it?
I think there's a very good chance of that happening. Maybe not as often where none of those 4 point guards are on the floor, but Igor's offense seems to be predicated on enabling the team's secondary playmakers like Josh Jackson, Devin Booker, Dragon Bender, even TJ Warren was referenced a couple of times, which kind of scares me. But if they can get TJ Warren to pass, Igor should be coach of the year. But yeah, it sounds like because there are so many read options in this offense, and because the ball's going to be moving side to side a lot, and there's a bunch of secondary pick and roll sets and all kinds of different things going on, it sounds like the guys on the wing are going to have a real chance to make plays, to get involved in those secondary pick and roll sets. And especially when that team goes small, Booker is a very good playmaker, a flawed one at this stage, but he can clearly see the court. Bender playmaking is one of the things he was praised for coming into the draft, his ability to see the floor. And then you've got Josh Jackson, who also coming into the draft was supposed to be this playmaking wing, but we didn't really see too many glimpses of it last year. So I think this year we'll see a little bit more Booker having the ball in his hands, Jackson having the ball in his hands. And they mentioned Jackson specifically, both McDonough and Kokoskov, as far as, those secondary playmakers on the wing that might have a little more responsibility this year.
That's really interesting. Now, I want to wrap up with a little conversation about the rookies. There was 5 rookies at Media Day, is that right?
Let's see. Yep, 5.
Eight Inakovo, Melton, Bridges, and King.
Yes.
Now that's a lot. That's a lot of rookies. But a couple of things that I want to talk about. First of all, who was the biggest personality of all the rookies?
Biggest personality of all the rookies was probably.
Let me guess. I'm gonna try and guess.
Okay.
Is it Bridges? Mikal Bridges?
It actually wasn't. He was kind of quiet and reserved.
Can I guess as well?
They kind of all were.
Oh, really?
Ah, interesting.
I was going to guess DeAnthony Melton, actually.
Yeah, he talks. He definitely talks.
Yeah, Melton has the capacity to talk. I don't know. Like, Okobo is obviously very shy, being from France, and English not his primary language. And Ayton was kind of reserved. You could tell he's the biggest personality right now. But Bridges was kind of just quiet and very straightforward. And then who else? Melton could talk, and King was King seems like a player who gets it. He's coming in on a 2-way contract, and I asked him, like, you're coming in on a 2-way contract on a team that has more wings than a KFC bucket. Like, what's your mindset going into the season? He's like, honestly, I know the situation. Like, it is what it is. I just control what I can control and be my best self, and that should be enough down the line. So he's very intelligent and knowledgeable about the situation that he's in. But yeah, as far as biggest personality, even a reserved Ayton would probably take the cake right now.
Did you phrase your question as more wings than a KFC bucket? Because that's great if you did.
I didn't specifically do that. I think I threw it in an article at some point this week. But
now, other players, I want to talk about how other players talked about the rookies. Like, did any of the veterans, or maybe even Devin Booker, we didn't really talk about Devin Booker yet, actually, but did any of the other players talk about the rookies, or did anything stand out with how they talked about the rookies? It seems like a lot of guys are really respecting the talent that DeAndre Ayton's bringing, first and foremost.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ayton was the only one that the other players were questioned about, just because, I think we had like 14 or 15 of the guys up at the podium, throughout the day. So by the time you get like halfway there, you're kind of running out of steam to ask the same questions over and over. But Ayton was the one that did keep coming up as far as their impressions of him. And Tyson Chandler's, he's very adamant about wanting him to dominate on both ends of the floor just because he has that incredible touch, that incredible offensive skill set. So he's kind of, I don't want to say that he's like, trying to make up for what happened with Alex Len, but you could tell that like he was Alex Len's mentor and that didn't really work out, but he's very high on Ayton, saying things about him that, we didn't really hear about Len, and understandably so. But, yeah, and a couple of guys mentioned, his freakish athleticism, the fact that he's really working hard and trying to better himself on the defensive end. They were all admitting that, it's going to take some time for him to figure that end out. But most people are pretty excited about what he's bringing to the court already. And that seems to be the buzz that's coming out of training camp as well.
Gerald Bourguet, Editor-in-Chief at Hoops Habit and the lead Phoenix Suns reporter, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You provided a lot of great insight for us. And thank you for everything that you're doing, asking a lot of really great questions. And I noticed that you're a great Twitter follow. First of all, I'm guessing everyone that's listening is already following you on Twitter. But if you're not, make sure to follow Gerald Bourguet. He posts links to all the articles that he writes about. He just wrote the 3 Phoenix Suns players that are facing the most pressure this season. Make sure and click that one and check it out. But thank you, 1, for all the stuff you do writing, but 2, for all the little things that you notice that other reporters don't notice that you tweet about. I want you to know that I appreciate it and I laugh at it, and it's the type of stuff that I love to see. So thank you for everything that you're doing for the team, and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for following along and for having me on the podcast. This was fun.
Thank you very much. Coming up next, we're going to have Nate Wolf, who just wrote an article about Devin Booker that we all need to talk about. So stay tuned. After this quick break, we'll be back with Nate. Joining us as a contributor to NBAMath.com and covering the Washington Wizards in the Future for B-Ball Index, Nate Wolf. Nate, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Super great. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy to have you on. Earlier today, we're recording on Thursday night, Nate posted a link to an article titled, "Can We Just Admit Devin Booker is Good?" And there's not a lot of NBA players, I think, in the NBA where there would be an article titled about them like that. Devin Booker might be one of the only, maybe Andrew Wiggins. There's a lot of other polarizing players out there, but Devin Booker seems to be the only one. What sort of drew you to this subject? What sort of drew you to writing about Devin Booker in this way, Nate?
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me on, guys. So I kind of took a little bit of a hiatus from basketball writing over the summer. Moved cities, started a new job, so I was a little bit busy. And then I kind of got a chance to look at like NBA Twitter from the outside looking in without writing much. So I saw a couple things. First is just like as a community, I think we kind of overrate defense to an extent. Like when I think about the best players in the NBA, those who are elite on offense overvalue or are more valuable than those who are elite on defense. And it just really isn't half the game. Creators are more important than stoppers at a certain level. And then the second thing I noticed was all of these lists coming out recently, like the top 100, top 50 players in the NBA lists on SI and ESPN. And Devin Booker was low. He was lower than a lot of guys who I would consider in the same range as him, guys like Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. He's out here putting up 25 points a game last year, and you're wondering, like, where's this disconnect? Why is a guy who's putting up such big numbers, albeit on a losing team, why is he considered, not in the same class, or why are, some people kind of hating on him. And so that's why I decided to just take a deeper look and write this article.
When you started the article, was it from the perspective of Devin Booker is good, or was it from the perspective of is Devin Booker good? Did you have a conclusion already, or were you sort of just trying to delve into the subject and see what you came up with?
Yeah, so I think probably if you'd asked me this a month ago, or if I'd written this a month ago, I would have been coming in with the question. But I think as I sat down to write this and kind of looked at, the film pieces that I watched and looked at some of the statistics, I thought, like, there's just no way that you can watch Devin Booker play and look at some of the, individual numbers and not think like this is a young superstar. This is a budding superstar. And so, kind of when I went in to write it, it's a little bit snarky in some parts. I was definitely thinking, yes, Devin Booker is good. I want the world to know.
The defense thing you bring up is really interesting, Nate. I mean, I think if you look at the past few MVPs that this league has had, all of them have had questionable defense, either currently or at various points in their career. And I think that's sort of an interesting question if you frame it in terms of perimeter players versus bigs. When we evaluate young players on the perimeter, guys like Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell are obvious names that come up right now. To what extent do you really think you can sort of ignore defense and not treat offense and defense equally in evaluating them and their talent, as opposed to maybe a big where you evaluate defense as something that's a little more important?
Yeah, so I think defense is unquestionably more important for big men because just naturally, like where their opponents play, they're both on the perimeter and in the paint. And Devin Booker, unless he's switched on to a big man, which the Suns don't really do that much of, he's not going to really be in the paint that much, affecting play. And so it is definitely, defense is important. I don't want to say that defense doesn't matter, but the thing is that Devin Booker is a young player, first off, so he's going to have bad habits anyways. He's been playing for the Suns, which is like an incubator of bad habits, and then he's also not a player whose like physical tools are that far away from being like a slightly below average player on defense. And then when you consider the offensive talent that he has, for me, it's like, okay, like you have this player on your hands who is, who deserves the big contract that he got because of what he adds offensively and because of the potential to be, like merely below average defensively.
Why do you think it is that the world is so split on Devin Booker, the basketball Twitterati, if you will? I think that, you made a couple points in the article talking about advanced statistics, but do you think that it's related to those advanced statistics, or do you think it's more related to the fact that the Suns have just been a losing team for his entire career?
I think it has a little bit to do with both. So like over the last, I'd say like 5 to 10 years, the sort of more like analytically minded NBA fans have realized that points per game is not a good indicator of how good a player is. And that's a good thing, that now we have these more sophisticated ways of, looking at a player's impact. So, people, I think, look at Devin Booker sometimes, and he kind of gets labeled as this empty calories scorer, which is a guy who, 15 years ago we would look at and say that's a good player. And today, you look at a guy like Jahlil Okafor, he's just a bad player who, in his rookie year, like scored a ton of points. And people look at Devin Booker and they kind of like can see that archetype. Like he puts up a lot of shots, he scores a lot of points, his team doesn't win, and he doesn't have good advanced numbers. That makes him an empty calories scorer, right? But you have to kind of dig deeper than that, I think. And on the other end of things, like people will just kind of watch him play and see the numbers and be like, okay, this guy does look like he came from 15 years ago, but he looks like he was Ray Allen 15 years ago, or, like Jalen Rose 15 years ago, who actually were good players. And so I think there's the split there between, looking at him as this empty calories scorer, or, kind of watching him and be like, yeah, he is a scorer. And that's basically, the one thing that he does extremely well. but that has, exceptional value. And I think that's kind of the split.
I think the most fascinating thing for me, at least, in evaluating Booker, or really evaluating any Suns prospect over the past few years, is the whole debate of nature versus nurture. Trying to evaluate how good players are inherently versus how much their system affects them. And in your article, I think you put it in a great way, a way that I'd never really thought about it before. You said Booker has had to teach himself an upper-level college course with an outdated, coffee-stained textbook and no professor, and he's passing with a solid B. Only the most straight-edge parents would fault him for that. And sort of stemming from that discussion, something that I've always wanted to ask someone who's not a Suns fan about this, and talking about system. Create a hypothetical situation where the Boston Celtics have drafted Josh Jackson and Dragan Bender over the past 2 years, and those guys work with Brad Stevens, and the Phoenix Suns have drafted Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown to work with Earl Watson and Jay Triano. Obviously, there's no way that we could ever really know what comes of this, but in your subjective opinion, what do those players look like now after developing in those various systems, and how different are they in terms of how we evaluate them?
Yeah, so first off, credit to Jackson Frank, who writes for a bunch of different places now, like B-Ball Breakdown and Liberty Ballers, I think, are the main two. For that line, he gave me that, and I was like, I need to use this, let me use it.
Oh, it's great.
So that's all him. Shout out to Jackson. But yeah, the question's a really good one. I'll take it a little bit away from Boston, actually, because the one I had a paragraph that I kind of got rid of last minute, but it compared Booker to Donovan Mitchell for a little bit. And Donovan Mitchell, has kind of become like the golden boy of the Western Conference. That's not really Devin Booker's title anymore. He's kind of the polarizing player out there. And, if you think about it, it's interesting because Igor Kokoshkov is coming from Utah, but like, if you look at Devin Booker and what he's good at, coming off of screens downhill, coming off of screens to shoot, kind of relocating without the ball while his team is in motion on the weak side or on the strong side and he's on the weak side. Like, these are things that in a coherent offensive system, these are things that happen. And on the Suns teams that we've seen the last few years, it's sort of been partially because of personnel and partially because the coaching was just bad. It's been like, give the ball to Devin and see if he can do something. And that's not exactly what he's good at, but he's kind of become, decent at it. Whereas Donovan Mitchell, who had a really great year last year, came into this just like perfect ecosystem for success where he had, rim running center and Gobert. He had shooters all around him. Booker just hasn't had that to work with. I think part of it's been personnel. So like with Bender and Jackson, you asked about, I'm not really high on either of those players. I'm really not high on Marquise Chris. These are guys who I think if you put them even on the Celtics or on the Jazz might not turn out that well. But Booker specifically is, I think, a really great player who's been placed in just a bad environment personnel wise, and then just hasn't had the help, from a good coach who can put a coherent system into place.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And I always think back to the first, I think it was 30-something games of the season when Devin Booker was a rookie and he still had other players around him that were respectable, and he was shooting like 53% from the three-point line. This is a situation when he's surrounded by good players, it tends to make you better. That's just kind of how it works. Now, you cover the entire NBA. First off, I want to say have fun covering Markieff Morris for the Wizards. That was an experience for us here on the Suns. But just to sort of wrap up this conversation, what do you think the Suns are going to look like coming into the season? So Marquise Chris is gone, and I did like that you brought him up because seeing him in a different, seeing him on the Rockets will be an interesting experience. That's a good situation for him. He has two guys that can get him to the ball running to the rim. He also missed the most dunks in the NBA the last 2 years, so let's see how many dunks he misses when he has guys that can actually get him the ball in good positions. But looking at the Suns from an outsider's perspective, we have a new coach. That's the wild card. We don't know what he's going to be like. I'm sure you followed the draft and DeAndre Ayton. There's also 4 other rookies: Mikal Bridges, Elia Kobo, DeAnthony Melton, and George King. He's on a 2-way. He's not going to play much. Ryan Anderson, Trevor Ariza are now on the team. We have some more veterans. What do you think the team's going to look like? And obviously, we're probably not shooting for playoffs. Sam and I have been pretty realistic. We're saying 35 wins would be a successful season. Getting up to 40 would be like an absolute everything goes right season. Yeah. But do you agree with that, or how do you view them coming into the season?
Yeah, I think with younger teams like the Suns, I don't really want to put like a win number in place because I don't think that's the most important part. For me, it would be, a successful season would be more growth from the youngsters like Jackson, like Booker, like Dragon Bender. I think that more than Ayton, I think that Ariza and Ryan Anderson will be difference makers in terms of the young players' development. The team's been a little bit light on shooting, definitely last year and the year before. And, like Booker is a player who I think in space can do a lot more than he can in kind of a crowded environment where he has to make passes that are a little bit out of his range, or he has to, kind of go through players at the rim instead of having more open lane. And so, more than just being good shooters, like Anderson and Ariza are good shooters from 28 feet. They're guys who you have to guard beyond the 3-point line, and they pull their men out so far. One thing I'm really looking forward to is the Booker Anderson pick and pop, if that ever happens, or if the Booker and Anderson are working on off-ball screens together. I think that I just don't know how you defend that unless you're switching every single screen. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they play. The coach is obviously the wild card, but you would think that coming from Utah, he's going to have a bit more of a system in place that kind of works to his players' strengths. So, I'm excited for the Suns, and I think they're going to be a fun team to watch.
You mentioned that the Suns were a little light on 3-point shooting, so I just pulled it up real quick. We had 5 players last season who shot at least 100 3-point attempts, but under 30%. In Marquise Chris, 190 attempts, 29%. Tyler Ulis, 28%. Mike James, 27%. Josh Jackson, 26%. And TJ Warren, 22%. 3 of those 5 guys are off the team now, so we'll see how it goes. But it seemed like an emphasis from the get-go this offseason that shooting and defense had to get better. And on paper it did, but I suppose we'll see.
Even just being watchable will be an improvement for the Suns this coming year. So we can hope for that at least. Nate Wolf, contributor for NBAMath.com, and you cover the Washington Wizards soon for B-Ball Index. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for writing about our Lord and Savior, Devin Booker. We're very excited to see him prove the world and you right, and the world wrong and you right. It'll be very fun to watch him in these coming seasons. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
No problem. And thank you for listening to The Timeline. Make sure to follow us at The Timeline Pod. Make sure to follow Nate at Nate Wolf NBA and Gerald Bourguet at Gerald Bourguet. Thank you to both of them for joining us. And thanks for listening. Don't forget, we're taking a week off, and we'll be back the week after to talk about training camp and preseason. Basketball is just around the corner.
Hey, Tim Tompkins here from the Sun Solar Panel Podcast. So you just got done listening to the Timeline Podcast. Mike and Sam do a great job. I listen to every single episode. And if you're like me, you want even more Suns content. So since you've wrapped up this episode of the Timeline, head on over and subscribe to the Sun Solar Panel Podcast. Chances are we have a new episode that you will enjoy. The Sun Solar Panel Podcast, available on iTunes, Google Play, and basically anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, and Thomas Hearns. Legends, whose four-way rivalry defined one of the greatest eras in boxing history. Relive their decade of dominance in the new Showtime sports documentary, The Kings, a 4-part series premiering Sunday, June 6th, only on Showtime.